I decided to take a weekend trip to a nearby town and booked an Airbnb for a night. The listing looked cozy and had great reviews, so I felt comfortable booking it. As I arrived at the Airbnb, I noticed that it was located in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods. I was a little uneasy, but I thought it would be a nice change from the city. The host welcomed me and showed me around the cabin. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. As the host left, I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV. That's when I heard a faint sound coming from the attic. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the house settling. But then the sound grew louder and more distinct. It sounded like footsteps. I tried to ignore it and watch TV, but the sound became louder and more persistent. Feeling uneasy, I decided to investigate. As I climbed up the attic stairs, the sound grew louder and I could hear what sounded like someone breathing heavily. I slowly pushed open the attic door and saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a man, staring straight ahead and not moving. I immediately ran downstairs and called the host, but there was no answer. I felt trapped, alone and scared. I decided to leave the cabin and call the police from a nearby gas station. The police arrived and searched the cabin but found nothing. They told me that it was likely just my imagination and advised me to leave the cabin. As I was leaving, I saw the host standing outside, looking at me with a strange expression. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong, and that the host knew more than he was letting on. The drive home was long and arduous, and I couldn't help but replay the events of the night over and over in my head. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it lingered for days after the incident. I eventually decided to look into the history of the Airbnb and the surrounding area. What I discovered was terrifying. The cabin had been the site of a gruesome murder 20 years ago. The victim was a woman who had rented the cabin for a weekend getaway, just like I had. The killer had never been caught, and the case remained unsolved. I couldn't believe that I had unknowingly stayed in a place where such a heinous crime had taken place. I couldn't help but wonder if the man in the attic was the killer himself, still lurking around the cabin all these years later. The experience left me traumatized, and I couldn't bring myself to stay in another Airbnb again. It was a reminder to always trust your instincts and to listen to that feeling of unease, no matter how small it may seem. Months went by, and I tried to move on from the incident, but something strange started to happen. I began receiving anonymous letters in the mail. They were written in the same handwriting, and each letter contained a cryptic message that seemed to be a threat. At first, I thought it was just a prank, but the letters kept coming. They were always delivered to my home or my office, and I could never find out who was sending them. The letters always made references to the night I stayed at the Airbnb, and it became clear that whoever was sending them knew about my experience. I tried to go to the police, but they couldn't do anything without evidence. I felt helpless and alone, and I began to fear for my life. The letters continued to come, and the messages grew more and more disturbing. One day, I received a final letter. It contained a single sentence: "I'm coming for you." I knew then that I had to take action. I couldn't just sit around and wait for something to happen. I hired a private investigator to look into the matter and help me find out who was behind the letters. The investigation took several weeks, and I spent most of my time in a constant state of fear and paranoia. I could never shake off the feeling that I was being watched and followed, and it was hard to trust anyone. Finally, the private investigator found a lead. It turned out that the letters were being sent by someone who had connections to the Airbnb host. The host had a brother who had been suspected of the murder that had taken place at the cabin 20 years ago. The brother had never been charged due to lack of evidence, but he had always maintained his innocence. It seemed that he had become obsessed with me, and had sent the letters as a way to terrorize and intimidate me. I was horrified. The thought of being stalked by a potential killer was too much to bear. The private investigator worked with the police to track down the brother, and he was eventually arrested and charged with harassment. Even though he was behind bars, I still couldn't shake off the fear and anxiety that had gripped me for months. I had lost my sense of safety and security, and I struggled to trust anyone or anything. The incident had a profound effect on me, and it took me a long time to come to terms with what had happened. I learned to listen to my instincts and to always take precautions when traveling alone.